Last time we ended talking about the three waves of feminism, and it was pointed out to me that I was using, because I got confused, and they look so similar, the past edition of our textbook. See, it's so similar to the correct one you have. Uh, Content-wise, they're very, very similar. Uh, so the author does mention a fourth wave. The fourth wave, as the author articulates it, and it's just this little snippet, it's just like some have argued. I haven't seen people talking about a fourth wave so much, but that's just me. Also, it's emphasizing that basically it includes men as well. You know, third wave feminism, I think, was pretty clear um, about that. Actually, and to a certain degree, you can see how it comes out of second wave feminism. The study of men and masculinity as part of the feminist movement is pretty strong, starting in the 80s, actually. So, anyways, there is a fourth wave of feminism. I I don't know. The book mentions it as a thing. I don't really see it as a distinct wave, but that's me. So enough on that. The book also talks about three feminist perspectives: liberal, radical, Marxist, and cultural. And I don't have a whole lot I want to say about those other than to say they are there, and if you're unclear on them, you should ask. You should ask about them. What's important to know, as you look at each one of them, what's important to know about them is to understand how they may have a different interest as they look at an artifact, right? So what is a liberal feminist perspective versus a cultural feminist perspective going to be looking for differently in the artifact? And the author is really good about saying, so for instance, in doing your critique, you would look for this or comment on that, right? So that's really key here. So as you look at those feminist perspectives, I'm not going to review them here, although I'll answer any questions you have about them. The key is to think about which perspective do you align with, or which perspective is most useful for you in discussing this artifact. That's something really key because of the next thing here, and that is how to then do a feminist criticism. And the first step is to identify your perspective. And so by that, and you can't just say, radical feminist, and then start going into analysis. You have to obviously explain what you mean by that, because when you say you're doing a feminist critique or engaging in feminist criticism, you need to be clear about what that is. You're identifying your perspective, and then when you say it's a feminist perspective or you're doing feminist criticism, I mean, how, right? Because you're looking at the ways in which gender and class meet at this nexus, largely keeping women financially disadvantaged and men financially advantaged. In case the Marxist feminist, right? So that leads us to this being very clear in your methodology about what it is you're looking at or you're looking for. Because if you say you're doing a feminist analysis of an artifact, there's a lot of questions about, well, what does that mean? I mean, so are you looking at stereotypes? Are you looking at, what are you looking at? So let me talk about that. Right. So general questions of feminist analysis, feminist criticism, right, is how are women and men depicted, right? So how are they depicted? And obviously we're thinking about the way they're depicted as being powerful. Are they being depicted as powerful or powerless, right? So you have powerful, powerless. Um, are they someone who is admirable, someone we want to be like, or someone we don't want to be like? So sort of a hero, or I'm not going to say anti-hero, it's a little more complicated, but the sort of anti-model, the person, the example we don't want to follow, right? Are they fitting into old stereotypes or familiar stereotypes, maybe I should say? Are they fitting into familiar stereotypes? And is that helpful? Is that problematic given the feminist perspective you just talked about? Right? So how are women and men depicted? And then think about that feminist perspective. What would that feminist perspective say about the way that women and men are being depicted? Right? And so in this, to think about what gender ideologies are being perpetuated or being challenged, right? So what notions about women and men, right, ideologies, right, notions about who should be doing what and who is better than whom in what ways and those sorts of things, right? How are they being perpetuated or challenged? Right? Do we have commercials? And I showed you one of those commercials last week talking about Valspar, the paint commercial, right, where the woman's doing the teleconference call with her husband and kids, and everything looks fine except for we see there's like food like on the walls. Like, listen, I have two wild children. We don't end up with food on the walls like that. You know what I mean? That's just too much. Okay. So what ideologies are perpetuated? So the idea of, in that case, that Valspar commercial, that men are not the natural caretakers of children, right? Men don't know what they're doing with children. That might be an example of that, right? Of the sort of gender ideologies that, in that case, are being perpetuated. Although challenged to the degree that, yeah, he's there. He seems pretty happy. He's got the kids, got it under control enough, I guess. I mean, they're all still alive. I don't know what the kitchen looked like beforehand, right? What did that kitchen look like beforehand? Okay. And so how does the artifact, or does the artifact, challenge or reinforce hegemonic ideas? We've talked about hegemony here so far, right? So is it, again, so these, again, talking about ideology, hegemony, you see where we're going with this. As we're talking about issues of gender, you can never fully separate from gender issues of class, race, sexuality, ability, body, and so forth, right? So as we're thinking about how women and men are depicted, how are women and men in different classes? It's also sort of Marxist, right? Depicted. Is there a difference in the way that women and men, as they're older versus younger, are depicted? That's actually pretty important, right? So those are the general questions, and generally speaking, how you do a feminist analysis. I'm asking you now to watch an excerpt, it's just an excerpt, of Killing Us Softly 3. Those of you in gender, this is not the same one, so beware of that. But you're going to watch an excerpt of Killing Us Softly 3. Please do take notes of the patterns that Kilborn, her name is Jean Kilborn, the patterns that Jean Kilborn identifies for women, for men, right? So do take note of that, and note what she says about the power of images and their relationship to establishing normalcy.